Greetings to you in the name of God the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. I want to lead us into Isaiah 56 today. A eunuch, a Jew, and a Gentile walk into a bar. Pause for a response. The bar joke has a remarkable way of being riddle-like. It takes things that are otherwise unlike or surprising and puts them in this shape of a riddle, and our minds rush to draw lines between them or figure out what may be the answer to the joke or to the riddle. Well, Isaiah has a sort of a knock-knock or a walk into a bar joke for us today, only instead of a bar, it's the Sabbath. A eunuch and a Jew and a Gentile are found together on the Sabbath. So why the Sabbath? Why would that be the context that these three are coming together? That's the question to face today. And I'm going to be starting this next week, a series of sermons on the Ten Commandments, on the Decalogue. And this will just be sort of an entryway because Isaiah is already here for us and the Sabbath is at hand. So I'll expand on the Sabbath later. But I want to enter into this just with this simple question around the Sabbath and its role in the Ten Commandments. I'm just guessing, but I feel experientially like most of us fall into one of three groups when it comes to the Ten Commandments. There's your kind of your non-denominational sort of popular church response that we're not under any laws, we're just under love, we're under Jesus. The God kind of mean, stern God of the Old Testament, the disciplinarian, has given way to Jesus the loving, Jesus the shepherd. This has no real scholarly following, whether that interests you or not. It's really difficult to think that the New Testament does away with the Ten Commandments. It cites them again and again, calls the people in the churches to obey them. But there is a sense in which Jesus gives new freedom. We'll have to talk about that when we come to the Ten Commandments. But there is, in America anyway, especially, this idea that we're not under any commandments. And so there's some people in that camp, perhaps you're there. Second group is the Nine Commandment Christian. So I have to keep the other nine. I can't worship other gods. I can't make idols, take the name of the Lord in vain, commit adultery, commit murder. I mean, these disobey father and mother. So those commandments seem to make sense to us. The Sabbath one, those in question. Now, that's a Jewish thing. It was on Saturday, and we worship on Sunday, and it's a ritual. And so a good portion of people kind of fit in there loosely. And then you get your Ten Commandment Christian. The Ten Commandment Christian keeps the Sabbath. They believe in that day is hallowed. There's no work. I've been in churches like that, and I think often of those kinds of churches, these really strict ones, as creating a day for a child which is exceedingly long and boring. I mean, that's the sense, the kind of feel we often have around the Ten Commandment Christian. I can't do anything. You just want me to be bored out of my mind all day. Well, we'll have to just think this through in coming weeks, but I want to suggest to you now that the Sabbath is actually the hub, it's the core for these other nine commandments, that we should take it very seriously. Now, how we keep it will be a question we'll have to address. It will take time to think that through, but I want to put this at the center of the other commandments. Karl Barth was a famous Swiss theologian in the last century, some say the most famous. If you're into theology at all, you'd know him. And so Barth said this. Barth said that the Sabbath commandment explains the other nine. In other words, it kind of gives them context and meaning. It is by far the longest commandment. It has the longest motivation and explanation in its case. So when we come to Isaiah and we start looking at the Sabbath, I want to go back to Exodus and Deuteronomy and look at the two versions of the Decalogue, of the Sabbath commandment. I'll read the one from Exodus for us. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, you or your son or your daughter, your male servant or your female servant, or your livestock, or the sojourner who is in your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made the heaven and the earth and the sea and all that is in them, and he rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy, set apart. The only difference in the Deuteronomy law, and this is the biggest difference between the two versions of the Ten Commandments, is that Deuteronomy, instead of saying, for the Lord made the heavens in 6 days, the reason for keeping the Sabbath is because he delivered them out of Egypt. And so the Sabbath gives the most potent, the most significant motivational clause for why to keep the law. Because he made the world and because he rescued you. When he's the God of creation, you're here because he's gone out of his way to make you and to preserve you and save you. So keep the day that he numbered and that he hallowed and called holy. Now, the reason that the Sabbath is a bridge or an explanation for the others is you can hear in it two sets of commandments or two sides. You hallow the Lord's day. You remember the Sabbath. In other words, we give account to God. We do this very thing I've just mentioned. We give thanks that we've been created, that we've been saved. And so it's in a way keeping those first three commandments. No other gods, not making idols or worshiping them, and not taking his name in vain. So it points back to or summarizes those first three commandments. But then it also looks forward to the other five, the other commandments that end the Decalogue, the second table we often call it. Because Exodus, as it enumerates who gets to rest, it's everyone. It's your oxen, it's your sheep, it's your cattle, it's your servants, your male servant, your son, your daughter, the sojourner, the wanderer from another land who happens to be with you. And you can hopefully anticipate the fact that in a world where there's no grocery stores and crops and work had to be done constantly to sustain life, that this is a huge break for those who are in the lower classes of society. They cannot be made to work. There were other cultures in that day that had breaks or had days where especially the wealthier elite classes did nothing, empty days, but never the working classes. And so in the Sabbath commandment, we get this anticipation of the other commands. They get to rest. There's justice. There's a relief. There's mercy for those who are most ostracized or most weakened or most vulnerable within the economy. There's other laws I've mentioned in last week and previous weeks that on those Sabbath gatherings 3 times a year and every 3 years, other gifts have to be given to these people. So that Sabbath law is both a hallowing of God and his name and an act of justice for the people. We'll come back to our passage in Isaiah today. You can pause and get a Bible, but you'll be able to see that what we read in Isaiah 56 has 3 sections for the Jew, the eunuch, and the Gentile. So the passage opens with this first commandment that says, do justice and do righteousness, hold fast to my covenant and keep my Sabbaths. Now, nobody's addressed there, but any Jew who would have heard those commands, the Jews are being addressed by Isaiah with this new vision of a new creation. And in this world, they're being told, look, keep the Sabbaths, do justice and righteousness. That would have been very familiar to them. You hear it in the Exodus command. You hear it when the Sabbath's repeated in Leviticus 19 or when the Sabbath's repeated again in Exodus 23. So they would have known that this is the welcome for Jews. That's not surprising at all. But who gets to be with them in this gathering, in this covenant people before the Lord? And 2 people come to mind, the eunuch and the foreigner. People who were traditionally excluded from the holy place, from the house of the Lord on the Sabbath when it came to worshiping. And so Isaiah's opening up of the vision, the opening up of Israel to the nations is taking place. And he addresses this issue. Who else can gather besides the Israelites? Well, first, the eunuch. Eunuchs were considered unclean because they were not reproductive. Children can ask their parents what a eunuch was. The law didn't specifically exclude eunuchs. It excluded kinds of people, and it came by Isaiah's time that eunuchs would have been included in that group. And so now God here invites them. Why? Because they seek the Lord. Isaiah says this, they keep the Sabbath, they choose things that please me. See, they know the first 3 commandments. They seek to do my will. They honor the Lord. They have me as their God. And third, they hold fast to my covenant. And the covenant was the calling to care for people, to do justice, to be merciful. So eunuchs are invited because they keep both sides of the Sabbath command, both sides of the Decalogue. They are people who honor the Lord, and they are people who do justice and seek it and hold fast to the covenant. And the foreigner who's far off, who's not in the sanctuary of God, who desires to join himself to the Lord and who desires to be one with his people, if they love my name and they keep my Sabbath and hold fast to my covenant. The language is repeated from the previous two sections for the Jew and for the eunuch. Only that you can see this new nuance. They love my name. That's the third commandment. They love my name. They want to join my people, and they want to keep my covenants. These people are bound together, you can see, by the Sabbath, because it's a law that welcomes Jew and Gentile and eunuch all together. That's why Isaiah selects it. That's what Karl Barth meant by the fact that it explains the others, that all humanity come into this command, this law. They meet together before the Lord in a hallowed time, and they do justice with one another. I want to bring this to us as a challenge for today and think ahead to the weeks when I'll say more about this Sabbath commandment and what it means for us. But it's the three things that bring this group together. They want to gather in the Lord's name. They want to do justice, and they want to hallow the name of the Lord. That's the three challenges I want before us today. It's the Lord's Day if you're hearing this on Sunday, or if you're looking ahead to the next one and you're hearing this during the week. The challenge is to use this day for these three aims that bring the people together in Isaiah. So first, how do we gather? I mean, that one seems almost absurd when we're isolated. We can't be together. We're meant for one another's health to stay at a distance. And I think this is a time of serious challenge for our creativity, for our innovation as the church. Some of you may have seen a Barna poll that was put out last month, and it was studying Christians since the beginning of COVID. And they found in this nationwide study that about a third of Christians still attend regularly their church, whether it's meeting or online. Another third attend occasionally or skip around to other churches, or even have left another church. So they're still churchgoers, but they're in this group of people. About 18% switched churches, and the other 15% swap around on any given week. And then a full third of people don't go anywhere anymore. They no longer associate or corporately gather with anyone. And so we have this evidence that the difficulty of our current health crisis, our current pandemic, has made it very difficult to do this first thing of the Sabbath. It made it easy to find pleasurable things to do on Sunday to replace our worship. And I want to issue a challenge to us to think innovatively, to think creatively, to think sacrificially about how to be together. When we're together, we find one another's needs. When we're together, we share joy and we uplift one another's spirits. And there's a command to be there, and when we're together, we bring our voices together to praise the Lord and make him delight in us. And so I'm calling committees together in the church in the coming week or two to build creative ideas to sustain this worship for what could be many more months in isolation. How do we gather safely? How do we meet one another's needs? How do we encourage one another face to face or online? It's going to take sacrifices. The Sabbath was a pleasure. It was a gift. But it wasn't meant to be our delight and our will. It was meant to be a conforming of our will to what the Lord required of that day. So we have to be, I think, if we're going to be obedient to the Sabbath and to these commandments, to seek ways to gather. The second thing that the Sabbath trains us to do is to seek ways to do justice. The ancient world was fairly simple. To do justice, you just shut down the economy and the work on a Sunday, on a Saturday for the Jews. And if nobody's working, everybody gets a rest. And then in those periods I mentioned at these different fasts, all of a sudden this excess has to be given to those who are poor and needy. Excesses of food, excesses of grain. That's the second challenge. If the church gathers and we worship and we're joyful, we must have an outlet for the neighbor. How do I love my neighbor? What do they most need? How do I bless those economically underprivileged and socially underprivileged, those cut off from the center of society in America? How do I gather and welcome them in our midst? That's our challenge. That too has to be creative in every generation. And the third commandment is to delight in the Lord and to be in his presence. That hallowing of the day, that's significant. Time is hallowed. The famous Jewish rabbi Abraham Heschel once said that the Sabbath is a palace in time. We think about palaces in place, in land. This is a palace in time. God sanctifies a moment and we stop. And we ought to gaze on the Lord and delight in him. Listen to how Heschel puts it. The person who keeps the Sabbath must learn to understand that the world has already been created and will survive without the help of humanity. The Sabbath is not for the sake of the weekdays. The weekdays are for the sake of the Sabbath. It is not an interlude, but the climax of living. Heschel's trying to turn our priorities upside down. We don't live for work and for our excursions and our hobbies. We live for the Lord and for his presence. All these things build up so that we might be before the Lord and rest. I suspect this one's the most challenging because a lot of us don't know how to do it. We're unaccustomed and unequipped with what it means to be before the Lord and delight in his goodness. Maybe the simplest recommendation I can make is spend time in the Psalms on the Lord's day. Gaze upon him, that phrase in Psalm 27, the threefold phrase, one thing I seek, one thing I ask, to dwell in his house all the days of my life, to gaze on his beauty, and to inquire in his temple. If nothing else on this day, when we seek to do his will, we ought to delight in him. Think of a God who's altogether perfect. Think of a God who's altogether wise and good. Our nation, make no mistake, I think we all observe, longs for unity and peace between political parties and races and ethnically and socially and economically distanced people. We want oneness, but we have no basis for getting it. And so we fail. And the Lord himself offers us to us as that basis. When we gaze on the good one, the wise one, the just one, the sovereign one, the beautiful one, the compassionate one, and we gather into his midst, we gain the basis to turn outward again in love and welcome to one another. We long to be with him in this day. I'll say more in a couple of weeks about what we can and can't do or should not do on the Sabbath. But today and in this week, think about delighting in this day. Do the things he'd most desire of you and seek his presence that you may gaze upon him. Amen.